So we're almost finished with our CRUD application and the API, and we just need to add a method to delete an activity from our database now. So let's head back over to VS Code and we'll go into Solution Explorer, and inside our activities folder we'll create a new C# class and we'll call this one simply delete. And once again, this is going to be a command, so let's make use of our command handler snippets to create this. And once again, we'll need to go ahead and just bring in all of the using statements for the various aspects of this. So we need to bring in mediator, persistence, we need to bring in system threading tasks, and system.threading, and system for the exception, and then just use the reformat shortcut to make it a bit neater. Now, our command in this case, we're going to need to know the ID of the activity we want to delete. So what we'll do in here, we'll say, give it a property of type GUID. That's going to be called ID. And then inside our logic, inside our handler, what we'll need to do first of all is get our activity. So once again, we'll just say var activity is await context.activities.findAsync, and we'll just pass in the request.id. Once again, we'll need to check to make sure that we've actually got an activity. So we'll say if the activity is equal to null, then we're just going to throw a new exception, and we'll say could not find activity. And if we do have an activity, then we're going to actually need to remove this from our context. So we'll say context.remove and then the activity. And the rest of this method can stay the same. Once again, if we do actually remove an activity from our context, then we'll have a change to be saved to our database, and this will return a number greater than 0. And if it does, then we're simply going to return unit.value. Again, it's still an empty object, but we are returning from this method rather than throwing an exception. So we just need to go to our activities controller next and add another endpoint, and this is going to be an HTTP delete, and again we need to pass in the ID of the activity. And once again we'll do public async task. Again we'll just return action results, and again we'll just return units in this case, and we'll call this delete. And we need to pass in the GUID of the root parameter here. And in the case of the body of this method, what we'll do is we'll say return await mediator.send, and this time we just want to create a new delete command and initialize it with the ID. So we'll say new delete command, and we'll use the curly brackets to initialize the ID and equal to the ID we're passing in from our roots. And that's all we need to do for our delete handler and method. So let's go ahead and make sure this works. And what we'll do is we'll just use the GUID for our test create activity, and we'll make sure that we can actually delete this one. So let's just get it to make sure we have it. And sure enough we do. And if we go to our delete activity method, and we'll just overwrite the roots with the ID of our activity, and then if we click send, we should get a 200 OK back from this, and we do. And our activity is no longer available. And if I try and send this request, then what we'll do is we'll get an internal server error because we are adding an exception at the moment for when we cannot find an activity. And we will deal with error handling later on, we're just not dealing with it right now. And if we attempt to get this activity, we should find it simply no longer exists. And we get the 204 no content again. So we've now got all of our handlers for the different elements of a CRUD application. All pretty simple stuff at the moment, but it is a good way to introduce the different handlers that we're using in our application and taking a look at the commands and the queries and the differences between them. So what we'll do is we'll save our changes into source control, and I've got 16 inside here. And what we want to do before we save our changes into source control is just take a look at our controllers and our other classes and just make sure that we don't have any using statements that can be removed, and the ones that are in faded color are not being used and are safe to be removed from our classes. And we can just use the quick fix here and say remove unnecessary usings. And let's just go through each element, each class, and just make sure that we remove anything that's unnecessary in our code so everything's clean and shiny. And if we look at our program.cs, we've got a bunch of stuff in here we're not using. So again, we can just use the remove unnecessary usings, and it will be the same for the startup class as well. So let's just again use the quick fix to remove these. And just double check each of your classes to make sure there's nothing inside there that you're not actually using anymore. And these should all be good except for this list one. So again, we'll use the quick fix here and then just go to the domain project, make sure there's nothing inside here that's not being used. And I can remove this using system from our value class. And just double check the persistence project as well, the data context. Again, we can remove system from here. And in our seed class, this one looks fine as well. So just double check your code, make sure you don't have anything that you don't need in there before you save your changes into source control. And this all looks good to me. So I've got some changes that I'm going to save into source control. So I'm just going to save all of these, or stage all of these. And then I'm just going to say end of section 4 as the commit message, and commit these changes, and then just push them up to GitHub. And what we'll take a look at next is a summary of what we've been doing in this section.